Time to finally get back to work on the XR100. Going to start assembling the top end today, and or tonight I should say. Last thing I ended up doing on this thing was after the RTV sealant set up, I gave a final torque to all of these small bolts right here, and those get torqued to 10 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds, which is like 84 inch-pounds. So now I'm going to get ready to assemble the cylinder. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is I need to remove the old piston rings. Okay, I've removed all the rings, and now I've cleaned the carbon off the top of the piston. The rest of the piston looks like it's in pretty good shape. I'm not going to bother miking it because no matter what I get, I'm going to reuse this piston because I'm doing a cheap repair on this bike. Don't want to sink much money into it. Anyways, next step I want to do is I want to clean the grooves for the piston rings, and the easiest way to do that is to take an old piston ring, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap one of these old piston rings and use it as a scraper to get in there and get any carbon that might be in those grooves out, although it doesn't really look like there's any sign of it, but we'll do it anyways. When I've done piston ring replacements before and bought the sets, they were nice enough to individually wrap the rings in separate envelopes indicating whether it was the top ring or the second ring. Here they're just all thrown together in one little pile here, so that's not going to tell me anything. And then to make matters worse, it does appear like there is a difference between the two rings here. One ring looks like it's of a different material, or at least has a coating on it that's different than the other ring. Okay, just looked at them under magnification, and it's very hard to see, but there's a tiny T near the ring gap here on each one of these. So I'm going to make the assumption that T stands for top. So that must tell me which side faces up. Now I've just got to figure out which one of these rings is which. So I'm going to clean up the two original rings and see if I can see a difference. So now I've got to go and double check and make sure that I got the right rings, because if I didn't, then I think the 23 bucks I spent on rings is going to be wasted. So I've got to double check this part number, 13011-KN4-A61, and make sure that these are the correct rings for this bike. Well, it looks like I got to the bottom of this piston ring problem over here on this XR. These piston rings that I had ordered, the 13011KN4A61s, are supposed to be the correct piston rings for a 2003 XR100. From 2001 on up through the whole XR100 lifespan, even when they changed over to the CRF100, they used these rings. Back in 2000, they used a different ring. What we found out was when I posted some high-resolution photos of this piston on a website, one of the experienced Honda guys noticed that there is a 436 number stamped right on here, and first thing they noticed was that this is an original Honda piston. It's not aftermarket, so that answered that question. And he noticed the 436 number, which he said is the middle part of the part number for the model year 2000 piston. So then when I looked up the model year 2000, it uses different rings. So what we've got is we've got a 2000 piston and an 03 motor. Either that, or for all I know, this whole motor is a 2000 motor that was put in an 03 bike. Anyways, called the distributor that sold me the rings. They said they'd take the rings back. I can send the rings back to them, and they won't charge me a restocking fee provided that I order the new rings from them online, which I was going to do that, and the rings were about 24 bucks. And then when I went to check out, I realized they were assessing me $16 to ship them UPS ground. They're in Michigan, but I think that was going to be probably an order direct from Honda, drop ship from Honda. They said they didn't have them in stock, so I would have to wait for them from Honda, and I'd have to pay another $16 on top of the 24. So now all of a sudden, I'm paying $40 for rings for the thing, and just kind of get disgusted by that whole issue. And so I've decided to do what a lot of people probably would not do in my situation, which is I'm going to put the old rings back on. I'm tired of dealing with this thing. I just want to put it together and see if it runs. I mean, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so the first ring to get reinstalled is the center section of the 3-piece oil control ring. So that gets put on, and then the 2 other pieces of the oil control ring get put on. And then you want to make sure that all 3 of the gaps on those 3 sections aren't lined up with each other. So you want to put them slightly off from each other, maybe about 15 or 20 degrees off from each other. Now here in the notes it says, do not switch the top and second rings. The top ring is narrower than the second ring in width. So I've got to figure out which one is the top ring, the narrower of the 2. Alright, so the top ring is definitely this one. This one is definitely narrower. And even though they're the same thickness this way, where I'm measuring them right now, I'm measuring the width. This is the narrow one, so this is my top ring. Okay, I've got the second ring installed. There is a tiny N on the ring, which would indicate the side that faces up. To get them 120 degrees apart, basically if you imagine this as a piece of, as a whole pie, you want to divide the pie into 3 pieces. So you have a Y-shaped cut on the top. And you're going to have one ring in this position, one gap in this position. That's the center part of the oil control ring. And then the second ring is here, so my 3rd gap is going to be right here. So I'm going to install the top ring now. Okay, I'm going to install the piston onto the connecting rod, but first, before I do that, I'm going to put some lube on the inside journal here of the top of the connecting rod. I'm going to lube the wrist pin before I reinsert it into the piston assembly. I'm also going to lube the piston all up. Okay, you want to make sure when you put your piston back on that the side that says in is facing towards the intake. So with the motor installed on the bike, the carburetor would be over here, so this is my intake side. So I'm going to put the piston on, and now my next step is I'm going to insert the little clip, the retaining clip that holds the wrist pin in. But before I do that, I'm going to wrap a rag around this so that if I drop that little pin, it doesn't fall down inside my freshly assembled motor. Alright, it can be a little tricky sometimes to snap that clip in, but you want to make sure that you actually have it fully seated and snapped into the groove, because you certainly don't want that coming out and ruining your motor. And then also the little end gap in that little clip, you want to make sure that that hasn't ended up in this area here where you actually would apply the pick tool to remove that clip later.